cave so hot it slowly drowns you from the inside. Crystals the size of trucks growing in total darkness. Glowing dinosaur bones turn to gemstone, and things in the deep shouldn't be alive, but are. These are more strange discoveries made in mines far below the surface. In 2000, two brothers were drilling a new tunnel about 1,000 feet underground in Mexico's Nica mine. They were after silver and lead, but when they broke through a wall, they found something that looked like it was from a completely different planet. The cave was packed with these enormous white crystals, some of the biggest ever found anywhere on Earth. Pillars that are 36 feet long and weigh up to 55 tons each. It looks like something out of a fantasy movie. But as beautiful as it looks, you can never just wander in there for a look around. The temperature sits at around 58 degrees Celsius or 136 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity so close to 100% that a person only lasts about 10 minutes before things get really dangerous. Stay longer and moisture starts condensing inside your lungs. You essentially drown while not actually submerged in water. It's really strange. The crystals got as big as they are because the cave had sat completely underwater in mineral-rich water for 500,000 years, with a pool of magma just underneath slowly cooking everything from below. So when the mining company pumped the water out to dig more tunnels, they accidentally revealed the whole thing. Miners in a South Africa silver mine kept pulling up these small metallic balls embedded in the rock around them. They're called the Klerksdorp Spheres, usually about an inch or two across. What really gets people is the three perfectly parallel grooves running around the middle of each one. They look like something intentionally carved. They're almost alien looking. They didn't look like they'd been sitting in a rock for 1 billion years, but the rock they came out of is around 3 billion years old. So this set off a huge debate. Some people were convinced these were proof of a civilization that existed long before the dinosaurs ever showed up. But when researchers cut them open, there was nothing inside. The material crumbled to dust the second it hit air. Geologists said they're concretions, which is just what happens when minerals slowly settle into gaps in sandy sediment and harden over millions of years. Even with that explanation out there, the precision of those grooves and the fact that the spheres are balanced well enough to spin on a flat surface still makes them one of the most talked about finds in mining history. Deep inside an old quarry in central France, explorers found dozens of vintage cars from the 30s just sitting in the dark, some stacked right on top of each other, slowly falling apart in the underground damp. Nobody in the nearby town ever talked about them. They were just completely forgotten. The most likely story goes back to the beginning of World War II. When the German army moved into France, they were known for grabbing civilian vehicles, either stripping them for parts or melting them down. So the townspeople drove their cars as deep into the mine as they could, somewhere soldiers would never think to look. The problem is the war went on for years. The cars sat there getting older and rustier, and some of the owners just never came back to get them. They stayed in the dark for over 70 years until miners and explorers came across the whole graveyard. By then, the metal had gotten so bad that trying to tow them out would have caused them to just fall apart on the spot. The Mopane gold mine in South Africa goes for more than 2 miles straight down. At that depth, the rock around you radiates heat like an oven. But in 2008, scientists found that the miners aren't the only living things down there. Sitting inside water-filled cracks in the rock, they found a species of bacteria that had been completely cut off from the surface for millions of years. They called it the Terminator. It doesn't need sunlight, oxygen, or anything that exists above ground. It survives by feeding off radioactive decay. The rocks in the mine contain uranium, and as that uranium breaks down naturally over time, it splits water molecules apart. The bacteria grabs the energy from that process and uses it to stay alive. It's a whole self-sufficient ecosystem. And this discovery really made scientists think about potential life on other planets because it proved that living things don't necessarily need a warm, breathable surface to survive. Apparently, they can live deep inside what looks like completely dead rock. In 1905, a mine manager named Frederick Wells spotted a faint glint of light about 18 feet below the surface of a South African mine. He climbed down and pulled out what he thought was just a big chunk of glass somebody had stuck there as a joke. It was the Cullinan Diamond, 3,106 carats, about the size of a human heart, and so clear it had this bluish white tint. Still the largest gem quality diamond ever found. But the find itself isn't even the best part of this story, because it was worth an unimaginable amount of money. Everyone was expecting there'd be a heist, so the authorities pulled the oldest trick trick in the book. They diverted attention away from the real diamond with a decoy. They put a fake stone in a heavy safe and loaded it onto a steamship surrounded by armed guards, specifically to pull attention away from the real thing. Meanwhile, the actual diamond was just wrapped in a plain brown paper box and sent through the regular mail. And it worked. It made it all the way to London without a single problem. Opal miners in Australia are usually after the colorful gemstones used in jewelry, and most days that's all they get. But in places like Lightning Ridge, a small outback town in New South Wales, sometimes they dig up something far more interesting. In 2015, for example, a miner found dinosaur remains where the bones hadn't just fossilized, they'd actually turned into solid opal. Over millions of years, silica-rich water slowly seeped into the spaces where the bones were, and instead of turning them into regular rock, like with normal fossils, it turned them into gemstone. It's beautiful. The result is this skeleton that glows with flashes of blue, green, and red, depending on how light hits it, of course. One specific find included 4 dinosaurs, from small juveniles up to a large adult, and every single one was preserved like this. It only happens under very specific conditions. The ground has to be acidic enough to dissolve the original bone, but stable enough to let the opal form and harden in its place without everything falling apart. Inside the abandoned copper mines of Paris Mountain in Wales, explorers found something that looks pretty nasty. Hanging from the low ceilings of the tunnels, long, pale, dripping filaments miners have nicknamed Snottites, which gives you a pretty clear picture of what you're looking at. But these are actually living colonies of bacteria that survive in conditions that would kill almost anything else. The water running down the walls in these mines is about as acidic as battery acid. Most things would dissolve on contact, but these bacteria feed on the sulfur and minerals in the surrounding rock. And as they break down, they drip sulfuric acid onto the floor beneath them. One drop on bare skin is enough to leave a chemical burn. Scientists love them though, because they show just how far life can push into extreme conditions, and they give researchers a better idea of how something might actually survive in the acidic atmosphere of a planet like Venus. Up in Siberia, there's a whole industry built around blasting through walls of frozen ground looking for woolly mammoth ivory. Workers use high-pressure water hoses to melt through the permafrost and get at whatever's buried underneath. Because the ground has been frozen for over 10,000 years, the ivory isn't fossilized or turned to stone, it's still in its original state, sometimes looking so fresh it's hard to believe the animal died thousands of years ago. Along with tusks, miners have pulled out preserved hair, frozen skin, and whole mummified mammoths with grass still sitting in their stomachs from their last meal. Mammoth ivory is legal to sell, unlike elephant ivory, which makes it worth some serious money, but it's a risky job. The tunnels are carved into soft, melting mud that can collapse at any moment without any warning. Back in 1734, miners working deep inside a mountain in Hallstatt, Austria, were digging through a wall of rock when they made a discovery that brought the entire operation to a halt. Embedded in this thick layer of salt and rubble, they found the body of a man, but this was not a skeleton. It was a fully preserved mummy. His skin, hair, even his clothing and shoes were intact despite being buried under hundreds of feet of earth. The salt had basically pickled the guy. The miners at the time didn't have modern tools to date the body, obviously, so they just assumed he had to be a fellow worker who died in a recent collapse. It wasn't until much later that researchers realized just how old the man in the salt really was. He wasn't from the 1700s. He was a prehistoric miner from the Iron Age. Probably died in a massive cave-in around 350 BCE. He'd been trapped in that spot for over 2,000 years. In 1885, a worker named Riedel was at a coal mine in Wolfsegg, Austria, when he cracked open a large block of coal and found something that looked unnatural, like manufactured. It was this heavy iron object, but as you can see, it looked pretty strange. What really made it strange was a deep, sharp incision that ran all the way around the middle. People immediately started calling it the Wolfsegg Iron, or the Salzburg Cube, and rumors began to spread that this was an out-of-place artifact, possibly something from some ancient alien civilization. For decades, it was treated as a major scientific mystery. Some thought it might be a meteorite, but it lacked the nickel and typical crust you'd see on a space rock. It wasn't until the 60s that scientists finally got a closer look. They realized the iron wasn't millions of years old. Instead, it was cast iron. The most likely explanation is that the object was a piece of mining equipment, specifically a counterweight used in the machinery at the time, that had accidentally fallen into a crack in the ground, and then over time, as the coal settled and hardened around it, it became fused inside. Sadly, it wasn't actually some long-lost ancient artifact. And that has been the video for today. I'll catch you, yes you specifically, next time.